get started. Can we get a roll call, please?
Jimenez, Perales, Cohen.
Here.
Sorry,
Carrasco.
Perales is here as well.
Thank you. Carrasco, Davis,
Here.
Esparza,
Here.
Arenas, Foley,
Here.
Mahan,
Here.
Jones,
Present.
Liccardo. Okay, thank you.
All right, so I'm going to hand it over to staff to do the presentations.
Good morning. We actually finished the presentation yesterday, so I think we're ready for questions relating to the Community and Economic Development City Service Area.
All right. So I'm looking for hands raised. And
Blair Beekman.
I think we were doing public comment at the end of each study session day.
Sorry.
okay.
So I think it's for the council members to ask questions now.
And don't see any hands raised. So Jennifer.
Yep, then we can move on to the Public Safety City Service Area, if that works, and we'll just do a quick changing of the guards.
All right.
And then they'll start a presentation in just a minute. Here, it's okay. I can.
That's all right.
Let me know, Jennifer, when they're ready.
No. Okay.
Chair, I think we're just waiting for a couple of our team members. Shouldn't be too long.
Okay, great.
And Mayor, either way, if you prefer, I do have all the notes, and I could run through the presentation as well.
Use your best judgment. If you think it's, just a couple minutes, that's fine. If you think it's gonna be longer, then go ahead and jump in.
Okay, we'll confirm on time. Chief Mata should be here and staff for questions as well, so that'd be important.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Just so everyone online knows, we're not currently presenting. We're just waiting for another presenter to come. So your sound is working. We're just waiting.
I think we can get started now, Mayor. The chief will be here in just a moment.
Okay, wonderful. All right, then we'll jump in with Chief Safian. Welcome, sir.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. My name is Robert Sapien. I'm the fire chief. I'll be speaking just a little bit out of script, but I'm happy to begin our presentation today on the fiscal year 2022-2023 proposed operating budget for the Public Safety CSA. Again, my name is Robert Sapien. The Public Safety CSA includes the Police Department, the Fire Department, Office of Emergency Management, as well as the Office of the Independent Police Auditor. We will have, in just one moment, Chief Anthony Mata, Assistant Police Chief Paul Joseph. I have OEM Deputy Director Jay McCamus with me and Siobhan Nuri of the IPA office. Our collective mission is to provide prevention and emergency response services for crime, fire, medical, hazardous, and disaster-related situations. Our CSA outcomes are twofold. The public feels safe anywhere, anytime in San Jose, and residents share the responsibility for public safety.
I'll start with the police department's core value services. So for the police department, our core services are the following: crime prevention and community education, which includes programs such as crime prevention, community engagement events such as Coffee with a Cop and other community events, school safety, and school liaison. The second core service is respond to calls for service and patrol support. These include programs such as our field patrol, our 911 communication center, special operations units, and other patrol support units. Our third core service is investigative services, which includes programs such as homicide, our sexual assaults unit, our gang investigations unit, family violence unit, and internal affairs. And our last core service is regulatory services, which includes gaming, cannabis regulation, and police permits. I will hand it over back to Chief Sapia.
Thank you, Chief. The fire department mission is to protect life, property, and the environment through prevention and response, providing all hazards, emergency response, including fire, rescue, hazardous materials, and emergency medical. The department's secondary public safety answering point, or fire communications, dispatches over 94,000 calls for service annually and regularly performs above accredited Center for Excellence averages in both emergency medical and fire priority dispatch services. As an accredited local academy, the department training division is able to deliver most mandated and career development trainings internally. Fire prevention services include arson investigation, plan review, inspection and permitting, and public education. The independent police auditor provides independent civilian oversight of the San Jose Police Department by taking in complaints from members of the public about San Jose police officers, auditing internal and external misconduct investigations, preparing annual public reports, making recommendations to improve San Jose Police Department policies, participating in the department's review of officer-involved shooting incidents, and conducting community outreach and engagement. The role of the Office of Emergency Management is to guide the city's emergency management program and to promote and collaborate with our regional and community partners to build a comprehensive and sustainable posture of resilience.
Next slide. Okay. In terms of the budget programs that the city has implemented, this slide shows a sample of our CSA programs. The full list of program listings can be found in the department sections of the proposed operating budget. Next slide. This slide represents our CSA performance measure dashboard, which can also be found on page 293 of the budget book. For the police department, our top 3 measures are listed here. Our first measure is a response time for priority 1 calls for service. Priority 1 calls includes present and imminent danger to life or major damage or loss of property. This measure includes call processing time, call queuing time, and drive time. The target for this measure is to respond within 6 minutes, 70% of the time. The response time has decreased slightly. Our second measure is the response time for priority 2 calls for service. Priority 2 calls include injury or property damage or potential for either to occur. This measure includes call processing time, again, call queuing time, and drive time. The target for this measure is to respond within 11 minutes, 70% of the time. These response times have also decreased. And our third measure is the year-over-year data for Part 1 crimes, as defined by the National Uniform Crime Reporting Standards. I'll hand it over back to Chief Sapia.
The fire department response time standard for priority 1, or red lights and sirens calls, is arrival within 8 minutes, 80% of the time, including call processing, turnout, and travel time segments. For priority 2 calls, the response standard is arrival within 13 minutes, 80% of the time, with the same segments. The Office of Emergency Management targets 30% of assigned Emergency Operations Center staff to receive required training. However, with the activation of the EOC in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the number of courses over the last 2 fiscal years were either reduced or eliminated. The total public safety CSA proposed budget for the fiscal year 2022-2023 shows a reduction of 4.9% or $41 million, while the total authorized positions increased by 25.92 full-time equivalents. The 8.98% reduction reflected in the proposed fire department budget is attributable to one-time general fund funding in fiscal year 2021-2022 for self-contained breathing apparatus at approximately $3 million that were put into service in March 2022, and the general fund transfer to capital for the Fire Training Center relocation project that is anticipated to be completed in fiscal year 2022-2023 at $36.5 million. The 40.89 reduction in the proposed Office of Emergency Management budget reflects one-time local sales tax funding for Office of Emergency Management projects at $1.6 million. Public Safety CSA serves to maintain a vibrant, safe community. We do this with a collaborative approach in providing essential emergency services and deterring crime, delivering high-quality police services, investigating crimes, and seeking successful prosecution of suspects. Our goal is to hire and train qualified officers and provide effective and timely response to calls for service. We are focused on the use of data analytics to inform and improve strategies, and we engage volunteers augmenting the talents of staff in response to emergencies, providing opportunity for the public to take on more responsibility for preparedness and to assist in major events. In the upcoming year, 2022-2023, the fire department will continue to pursue advancement in all 5 focus areas of its Vision 2023 strategic business plan, including operations, sustainable workforce, community alliance, infrastructure and support, and cost savings and revenue generation. Additionally, the department remains focused on its response time performance improvement work plan. Initiatives in that work plan include resource deployment enhancements and refinements, various technology advancements, including expanded use of GIS and AVL, traffic management, analytics and dashboards, automatic aid agreement revisions, and CAD to CAD links with other agencies. The following are a few key budget actions for the Public Safety CSA, which include Police Sworn Hire Ahead program, which fills vacant positions with street-ready officers. It takes approximately 12 to 14 months for a recruit to complete the academy and field training to be considered street-ready. Next, foot patrols in downtown and high-needs neighborhoods was previously one-time funded for $750,000. The current proposal adds 16 ongoing positions. Mobile Crisis Assessment Team was previously one-time grant funded. The current proposal adds 4 officers to respond to mental health calls. Domestic Violence High-Risk Response Team continues one-time funding for advocates. An employee services workforce enhancement in the fire department will add 2 positions within its Bureau of Administrative Services Employee Services Unit to meet sworn recruitment and promotion demands. Also in the fire department, an arson unit staffing proposal would add 1 arson investigator position to provide relief capacity coverage behind vacancies and absences and better meet high workload levels. The fire department proposes public education staffing, which would add 1 public information representative position to strengthen development and delivery of public information and fire prevention information to better reach our diverse community. Employee parking lot security is proposed to monitor areas surrounding the police administration building to maintain safety for fire and police communications personnel arriving and leaving the 911 communications center at late hours. And the Community Emergency Response Team Response Training Program, funding for consultant services and training equipment to continue the complex 20-hour CERT or Community Emergency Response Training Program.
In summary, preserving emergency response capacity remains the highest priority of this CSA. Resources will continue to be focused on providing essential emergency services in a timely manner in order to protect life, property, and the environment. We will continue to look for efficiencies and leverage technology, funding opportunities, and data analytics in order to improve service levels to address crime, medical, and fire-related situations successfully.
This concludes our presentation. We are happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you. Thank you both. I'm having difficulty being able to pull up the Zoom link, and so I'm going to rely on Grace to see if there are hands that are raised.
There's currently no hands raised.
Okay. Let me turn to my right here, Councilmember Cohen. I had a few questions, but so I'll give folks a chance to think of theirs while I just jump in. Thanks for the presentation. Chief Mata, I know that you've just taken the helm in the last few months, so there's a lot obviously coming in to digest and process as you're putting together your management strategy. One ongoing concern I've had is looking at response times historically over the last several years. And we've added net, I think, about 220 officers, net of retirements and departures and so forth, to the department since roughly 2016 or 17. And yet we're seeing response times decline. And I guess I'm trying to understand better why that's happening despite the fact that we're adding more officers, and what strategies we might have to address that.
Sure, Mayor. As is mentioned in the budget, we have the Hired Ahead program, right. Which, yes, we have added officers to the department, but those are due to attrition. So we're maintaining our current staffing levels of 1150. I think it's 1153 now, to maintain those to respond to the core services like you mentioned, patrol, investigations. So as we add officers to patrol, we know that the calls and the population to this city has increased. So the calls have increased, and the officers that we have on patrol are doing the best they can to address and respond to those calls. So the strategy would be to, part of the redistricting that we have, our RFP, is to look at how we can better deploy those officers in those specific areas, or if we need to consolidate or expand. But it all comes down to adding more officers to patrol to reduce those response times. Some of the things that we're also looking at are the type of calls, excuse me, that these officers are responding to reduce those response times. So using data analytics, we have a dashboard that we look at response times and how we respond in specific districts, specific areas of the city, and how we can better deploy our officers to increase those response times. Again, without adding, well, with the RFP, we're looking to see how we can add more officers in those specific areas to increase those times. But in the meantime, we're going to use the dashboard data to better deploy our officers to increase those response times.
Tony, as part of that study, I think it would be important to look at officer use of time, just especially as we're reimagining, public safety and what calls and that the officers are going on, and any automation efforts we can help you with too. I think you're looking at that as part of your strategic plan to make sure we're deploying our officers as efficiently and their time is used as efficiently as we go forward too. So I think that was part of it when you're looking at use of technology and seeing where we can automate certain things and as well going forward. So I think that I think that was part of what we were also going to look at.
That's correct.
And thank you, and I appreciate that that there are things that we can do to try to better utilize the time. The most valuable resource we have, of course, is the time of the people who serve. And you mentioned the redistricting, and I know that's been a longstanding challenge for us. When do we expect that to be completed?
The the RFP is out right now. I think have someone from my staff that can better provide the exact date. I want to say later this year, but I think we're still in the RFP phase.
Lisa Perez
Hi.
from the Police Department.
Lisa.
Hi. So the RFP just closed and we have a couple proposals to evaluate. So we're at the very beginning stages of that process.
Okay. So is that a year off then before we can expect to see new lines drawn?
Yeah, so we would go through the evaluation process, hopefully have a contract over the summertime, and then get the contractor to start working on it. I think we gave ourselves another year and a half to get something implemented.
Yeah.
That's our timeline.
Right.
It depends on the timeline the consultant gives us, and we're still under evaluation, so we don't have a firm timeline yet until we go through that contract process.
And we are giving regular updates to public safety, finance, and strategic support on redistricting. It's part of their bi-monthly operations report, so the committee can keep up to date on the status of this project.
Thank you. And then the mention of data analytics, I know it's in the report as well. I've certainly seen it deployed very effectively on the fire side. When we had a presentation, the Smart Cities Committee, there was a lot of talk about visualization, for example, with data, but what I wasn't able to clearly see was how we were using data actually to change our process or to make decisions differently. In other words, using data actually inform changing our actions, right? And so I think it would be helpful, as we're, whether it's going to the PISVIS committee or Smart City Committee, for us to be able to see more clearly how data is being used to guide decisions, to improve outcomes. It feels as though, I know there's dashboards out there that are informing folks about crime and about, I've gone on the website. I appreciate that there's been a lot of effort to try to increase transparency, which is great. But I'd be really interested in a better understanding how we're using data to actually manage. And certainly welcome any thoughts you have now, but we can also take it offline, be interested in seeing maybe in a future presentation how that happens.
Sure, Mayor. That's definitely something that our executive team is going to look at to make more data-driven and evidence-based decisions based on data, and how we can, again, leverage this type of information to deploy our resources more effectively, both not only patrol, but also in investigations. And that's something that we will be exploring.
Thanks,
to
Chief.
do that.
And I know that when we just saw that slide, the last slide come up, oh, there it is. It says the outcomes. The public feels safe anywhere. Oh, no, there it is. Yep. The public feels safe anywhere, anytime San Jose. Residents share responsibility for public safety. Those are certainly good outcomes. I'm not sure, I'm not an expert in determining how we best measure that. I know there are surveys and different ways of doing it. But it's actually not in our dashboard, neither one of those particular elements. We define them as outcomes, but we don't actually measure them as outcomes. And I know it's far from perfect. We know this is a very subjective. It's a very subjective thing to try to understand how people feel in terms of safety. They may be hearing national stories about whatever's going on. There's shootings in Chicago, and that makes them feel less safe. You know, this is not. It's not simply something we have much exclusive control over. But I guess my concern is, if the concern is really around, if we believe that's the outcome, is we want public to feel safer, it's not clear to me that our dashboard aligns with that, and that our decision making is aligned with it. And it may well be aligned, but we're just not seeing it through what's apparent. And so, as you're thinking through this, Chief, I would just want to encourage us to figure out how we get all those aligned. And maybe that's not the right outcome. Maybe we need to change what we are measuring in terms of outcomes. I know in the 80s and 90s, when San Jose was, a leading city in community policing, the national dialogue was that, hey, response times aren't really the right way to measure outcomes, because it's not about getting to the burglary faster. It's about how we prevent burglaries and how we make people feel safer in their own communities. And so maybe that means we need different outcome measures. But I guess my concern is that I don't feel as though we're aligned.
Yeah, so can I jump in?
Yeah.
So we haven't done a major look at our performance measures at the department or the city service area in years. It's been incremental modifications to them, some drops, some adds, some language changes. And we, as you'll see, an MBA that we just released late last night, as part of the roadmap, we intend to relook at our performance measures. And obviously we're going to we're going to get more equity measurements into them, but we're going to be attempting to have better alignment with all of our performance measures to our outcomes, have measurements for our outcomes all the way up through the city roadmap and our enterprise priorities. Because I know we've discussed having performance measures for our roadmap and our enterprise priorities, but they won't be good if they're not aligned all the way down to the departmental operational level. And I think would otherwise cause organizational confusion about what are we trying to get at here. But we are intending to have outcome measures along with performance measures and activity and workload highlights. So your point's very well taken, because it's hard to know what success looks like if we don't have a measure related to our outcomes. So to what end? So we have it'll likely be a multi-year project, but we're going to be all hands on deck starting this next fiscal year if the council approves that on the roadmap as we have suggested.
And Mayor, this is Jim Shannon. Just as part of that work too, some of these measures we do have, but they're sort of maybe a little bit buried too far down. They need to be sort of pulled up at a level. So, for example, on page 297 of the Public Safety CSA, there is a survey there for percentage of residents who feel percentage of residents surveyed who perceive themselves safe or very safe in different areas, like in their neighborhood, city park. So there's some of that elements are there, but to your point, pulling that up and having that be more of a driving factor will be an important part of the process.
Forgive me, I was looking at the dashboard without regard to the outcome measures out there. So thank you for that.
And then one last thing I'd like to add, Mayor, is that we're currently working on a customer satisfaction survey.
Yeah.
So when we respond out to calls, having the community provide a response on how our service was and their satisfaction with our service. So that's something that we're going to be deploying again to better understand how we can better help our community.
That's great. Thank you, Chief. And certainly happy to see that the clearance rates are improving. That's great, a great step as well. All right, I know several folks have indicated they'd like to speak. I think Councilmember Foley online. Councilmember Foley?
Thank you so much. Thank you for the presentation on the public safety budgets. I have a couple of questions for you, Chief Mata, regarding some of the programs that we've been funding for a while, and I just want to find out how they're working. For one, we've been funding the Higher Ahead program for a couple of years, and it's again in the budget this year. Is it working? Are we able to maintain our staffing levels with the Higher Ahead program?
Thank you, Councilmember, for the question. It is working to the extent that we're able to recruit individuals for this position or these positions here as officers. And as was mentioned earlier, we're using this program to identify or hire officers as officers leave the department through attrition. I can say that we've had successful recruits or academies in the last several years, up to 50. Currently, right now, we're at 36, I think, our last academy. However, the challenge is our attrition with those that we hire. Right now, we're approaching almost between a 35 and 40% attrition rate. So what that means is once we hire them in the academy, we lose a certain portion. And then through the FTO program, we lose another portion as well, with an overall attrition rate, like I said, right now, between 35 and 40%, which is, high. We would like to retain these officers. However, I think given the sentiment about policing, given that we're reaching out to individuals that may not have thought that this was a career choice for them. Maybe they decide during the academy and FTO program that this isn't the job for them. But we're still working hard. Our recruiting unit is working hard and our academy unit to train these officers to be street ready for us in the future. So it is working. We just have some challenges that we're working through.
Thank you. Can you talk to me a little bit about the attrition? So you're saying 35 to 40% attrition from those who start at the academy, get sworn in, and then resign at that point, or throughout the whole process? And how does this compare with other jurisdictions?
Sure. I don't know how this compares to other jurisdictions. I know other jurisdictions are having trouble hiring. We don't have that. We're bringing them in. However, again, like I mentioned, for other reasons, they do not stay, or we find that they don't meet the recommendations or the requirements in the academy or the FTO program. So rather than continue with that, if they don't qualify, then they are terminated or they resign. So for example, I'll just give you some information here that I have. For the October 2020 Academy, San Jose 39, we hired 50 recruits and we lost 14 in the academy. So 37 remained going into the FTO program. And then we lost 8 out of those 37 for a total of 29 recruits that had made it through the FTO program, which gives us a 43% total attrition rate. So again, for reasons that I mentioned, that this profession may not be for some individuals, and that we are reaching out to individuals, again, who may not have thought this was their profession. And maybe some folks think that this is just a job, but it's not a job. This is a career that's very stressful and demanding. And maybe some individuals, have other thoughts on that. So that's just an example of what we're facing and some of the challenges we have.
Okay, so I'm hearing from you that people are leaving in part because they're during the training, they may not be qualified. It may not be the right fit for them. So you're encouraging them to leave. But I'm concerned about the 8 who left after the field training. Are you doing exit interviews with them to get an idea as to why they're leaving at that point? Because at this point, they made it through the academy and now they're training and now they've decided real life, maybe this isn't a job for them. But is there a way that we can do pre-screening ahead of time instead of spending all these resources on individuals who then we find out it's not a good fit in the field training? So just some efficiencies there. Do you do some exit interviews with the 8 or those who are leaving after field training, who are leaving on their own and not because we're encouraging them, that it's not a good fit?
Right. Again, they choose to resign, and the ones that we do release are for performance
Okay.
because they do not meet the requirements. So I can check and see if we have our, yes, I'll have our Deputy Chief Heather Randall speak to that as she oversees the academy and what they see as well.
Okay.
Good
Is that
morning.
now or she's
Yeah, I'm
later?
here. I'm here.
Okay,
Deputy
hi,
Chief Heather
Heather.
Randall, Bureau of
Hi.
Administration. And to answer your question, there is several layers through our training. And so when we hire folks, yes, they meet the qualifications. We think that they're ready to become police officers, but we certainly don't know until they get into the academy. Once they get there, some are unable to perform the tests. They fail out for that. And then the other group that you're talking about, the 8 who go into the field training program, now that's a whole new scenario for them. It's no longer a controlled environment. They're going out into the community, and some just don't perform to our standards. And so we give them the opportunity to resign.
Thank you. That makes perfect sense. And actually that's a final check on whether they're someone we want representing us out in the police department. So I really appreciate that. Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to the Foot Patrol. We funded Foot Patrol last year, and my understanding is we're looking at 16. Is that an ongoing budget? How many positions have we actually filled in the Foot Patrol unit, and where are they being deployed?
Okay, right now the current foot patrols are on overtime, and they're in high need areas. So this budget add would add an ongoing 16 officers to each division. So 4 for each of the 4 divisions to continue that, not on overtime, but to be on a permanent basis. So currently, the foot patrols that we have are being managed by our captains in each division to go into special areas or high need areas that are in need of foot patrols, more police presence, addressing specific crime elements that are happening in those areas. So the additional 16 will be added to each division and for each captain to utilize in their divisions to address not only crime issues, but also to engage with the community. So right now, we only have a few. The added 16 will be added, 4 will be added to each division so that captains can deploy as needed.
Okay, great. And really the same question about the traffic enforcement unit. How many positions are available after this budget, and how many opening? Well, we're funding traffic enforcement unit, but how many officers do you have to fill those positions at the moment?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out where we're funding traffic enforcement unit. I don't see.
I'm just asking in general, actually. I I'm not looking at the specific budget.
Sure.
I just want to make sure you have enough resources to expand the traffic enforcement unit, and not just the dollars, the men and women to fill those positions.
Sure. So we have a variety of vacancies throughout the department, not just in TEU, the traffic enforcement unit. We also have vacancies in investigations, and as we mentioned, in patrol. So our priority is to staff patrol, and as fully staffed patrol, and once that is done, then the excess officers, when we have them available, will go to those vacancies. Like I mentioned, both in training, in our Bureau of Administration, for our academies, investigations as detectives, and special operations, which traffic enforcement unit is one of them. Currently, we have 18 positions there, 1 lieutenant, 3 sergeants, and 14 officers. And we need 3 additional sergeants and 9 officers. This traffic enforcement unit has 2 shifts. They work on Monday through Thursday from 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. And then the swing shift comes on Thursdays and Fridays from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. So as we gain more officers, this is one of the units that we will fill with officers, but it has to be a balanced approach because we also have other vacancies throughout the department as well.
Understand. I just have a general question about your budget, Chief Mata, and that's in relation to the 400 plus initiatives from the various reports and recommendations that we've taken a look at over the past 3 months, most recently the RIPS recommendations on Tuesday. Does your budget include the adequate funding to implement the majority of those? And I realize that RIPS, the Reimagining Public Safety, hasn't been, we haven't approved all of those. They haven't been specified as to how they're going to be done, but the others have been yellow or green lit or put forward into your spreadsheet. So do you have the money in the budget to handle all of this? And is most of it coming from your budget, or is it coming from, there's a lot of technology upgrades too, is that coming from other budgets?
Thank you for the question. We do not have the budget for items that will require some funding. As you mentioned, we did green light some. Those do not require any additional funding. Those are some of the things that we can do right now. The yellow and then the red, as we will move forward with the recommendations, which are now up to 454. We will take a look at those, review them, evaluate them, and see what funding is necessary. And we would work with the budget office and the city manager's office to prioritize these recommendations. And if needed, we would seek the funding to implement those.
Okay, great. And then finally, and I don't see a clock, so I don't know if I've reached my 10 minutes, but I just assume that I am. Questions around CERT training, and not just the training. I see that there's an ongoing budget for the personnel training, but what about some of the supplies and materials that they need? I'd love to see added in CERT backpacks that are necessary for the volunteers. And I've heard a CERT trailer is needed, and translators, anything like that. Is that, can we accommodate in that in the budget? It looks like it's under 500,000 for the total amount. So I'm hoping that we can take a look at CERT and make sure that we provide enough funds to adequately assist those volunteers who are helping us in times of emergency. So I don't see it in the budget currently, but those are things that we may be asking for budget augmentations. Any thoughts on the CERT program, Chief?
Yes,
Council member, this is Jay McCamus, Deputy Director of the Office of Emergency Management.
Perfect. Yes, thank you.
Good morning. The CERT program is currently funded in this budget to do two things. One, to try and sustain our ongoing training program. The performance measures are basically one course per district, a course in Vietnamese, a course in Spanish, and that's our normal training program. And the budget does not quite adequately provide for that, and we're going to make it happen. The other portion of the budget really addresses our desire to get into neighborhoods that we're currently not making solid inroads, targeting the most at risk and developing programs for those neighborhoods that fit their needs. That will require additional equipment. It will require translations, trans-created materials, meaning it takes into account cultural considerations, very much like the Listos program, which we hope to launch next year if we can. So we're looking forward for that. But we can always use more resources to increase the program as it is right now.
Thank you for that. And I really appreciate that you're making an effort to get out into communities that don't have strong CERT programs and to take into consideration cultural issues and training along with that. So I really appreciate that. I'm very focused on CERT and making sure that we have the funding that we need, not just in the training, but in the equipment to make their jobs successful as volunteers, as we may depend on them during a earthquake or fire or other natural disasters or other things that we may have coming our way. With that, I did see the clock and I'm way over time. I appreciate the patience of my colleagues and I will relinquish the mic and move on. Thank you very much. Look forward to hearing the debate.
Thank you, Councilmember Foley. The mayor stepped away, so I'm going to go ahead and call Councilmember Matt Mahan, who I think has his hand raised online. Matt, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. I'll be quick. I just wanted to pick up on the thread of conversation that the mayor and Jennifer were having about KPIs, and it's certainly broader than just public safety. I was actually first reflecting on this yesterday when reviewing the economic development indicators. And so, Jennifer, this is maybe a question for you. It's probably more of a comment to start. I think that one of the things I'd like to see us move toward, and I know I've written some memos to this effect that my colleagues have accepted. I think it would be really helpful if, in addition to having the time series that looks back and says, how have we performed against this measure? I think a cycle that would be really healthy for the organization would be at this moment when we are, as a council, giving direction around spending, around new investments, if we were to look at the goals that we're setting and be more future oriented toward, well, here's where we've been, here's where we think we can get in the next year, and being realistic about that. I mean, the improvement we may hope to see in a measure might be 3%, might be 5%. I mean, we shouldn't believe that we're going to change the world overnight. But I think it would be helpful to get into more of a pattern of, as we're making these spending allocations, particularly when we're increasing headcount or funding somewhere, to tie it back to the success measures and specifically try to estimate the impact we believe will have and why, create that connective tissue more explicitly between, okay, we're making these investments. This is one of our key success metrics that we think we're going to be able to move. Here's kind of the magnitude. And again, that movement might be very modest. It might be shaving 10 seconds off a response time. It might be speeding up a process by 5%, and sort of helping the council, helping all of us understand how the investments we're making connect to driving those metrics, or those outcomes, really, those success measures. And then when we come back around next year through this cycle, I think it would be useful for all of us to be able to reflect back and say, well, here was the investment we made. Here's how much we thought we'd move the needle. And here's what actually happened. And maybe it went better than expected, maybe worse, maybe we were right on target. And why? You know, what did we learn? And then how does that inform the investments that we're making the next year? And for me, it's challenging to sort of feel this disconnect between the spending that we're approving and talking about, and then these measures that seem to be kind of floating in a disconnected way and seem to be more just kind of looking backwards at how we did. I'd like us to be more forward-looking, strategic, and feel like we're making key investments and have a sense, have a hypothesis. We're basically testing hypotheses with our investments as to how we're going to move the needle. So I just wanted to re-articulate that. I know I've put that in a number of memos. I know we're trying to move in that direction, but I didn't quite hear that piece of it come out in the conversation between the mayor and city manager. So yeah, Jennifer, could you just comment on if that makes sense and if that is part of the plan?
Yeah, so I appreciate the comment. So, so in our city service area, on our department sections of the budget, each department has, again, a set of performance measures that looks backward at how we actually did on those performance measures. What's our target? What was our target for the current fiscal year that we're in? What is the estimate we think we're going to do against that target? And then what is our new target for the 22-23 fiscal year? In the CSA sections, we tried to attempt to take it to a little bit of a higher level and look more comprehensively by the CSA by outcome. But I don't, to the point is we don't have exact measures for the outcomes, but underneath the outcomes, we do have 5-year strategic goals under each outcome. And then we have performance measures related to those outcomes, to those goals, those 5-year goals. We also do put in an actual for last year related to those performance measures and goals, the target for this current year, how we think we're going to do against that target in the current year, the target for next year, and we do have a 5-year goal listed for each of those performance measures for each of the strategic goals. So those are all
Jennifer,
laid out.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing in any of our discussions here and our reflection how we did against the goal we set last year when we approved the budget and how that learning is carrying forward and informing what we're doing this year. I mean, a simple question based on what you're describing would be something like, based on the staffing investments we're making in our police department this year, how much do we expect to reduce the priority 1 response times by in the next 12 months? And if we have that number, great. I didn't hear that today, but I'd also want to know, well, what happened last year when we invested in staffing? Did we think we were going to move that number or not? And did we? And what's the learning? What I'm concerned about is the lack of kind of loop closing, reflection, and learning so that we're making better investments and strategic decisions each year as we learn together. That's what I'm more focused on.
Yeah, understood. And we do that behind the scenes when the departments are putting together the budget. It's not really being reflected in these presentations today, but certainly open to questions, and we can be more deliberate. And I think this entire performance measure alignment, all the way up again to the roadmap and our enterprise priorities, needs to be refreshed, overhauled, and do some resets here, because I think it's not in the position that I think we all want it to be. We haven't focused on it in the last several years, and we're proposing to focus on it starting with this new budget starting in July as part of the roadmap. It's a lot of work, but we want to take it on because we do see the importance of it, and we need to get back to it. So again, we're not just measuring, but we're managing our performance. And so that's one of our upcoming goals, and we'll be discussing that more on Monday with the roadmap.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm really excited for that work. I do think it's important. I think it's both within the departments optimizing performance, as you and the mayor were discussing earlier, but I also think it's up to the level of the council ensuring that we're learning and that we're really understanding which of our spending allocations are having the biggest impact, which strategies are working, what was our assumption last year, and did it pan out? Because we want to get smarter too, I think, as we're pushing on these as we're asking questions about how we allocate our resources. And and where we should increase staffing or other investments in technology, for example. Well, what did we learn from the last budget cycle related to these very important outcomes that we hopefully believe reflect the most important impact we can have for the community? So I'm excited for the process. I do think there's a lot of room for improvement here, even just focusing on how we're learning at the council level based on the actual performance and kind of what we thought would happen when we made an investment.
Yeah, and I appreciate that again. Just to be clear, though, just for the community and the mayor and city council, this budget with such a and we're talking mostly about the general fund, that we have 141 different funds in the budget, but most of the attention is on the general fund because that's what most of our community thinks as their day-to-day service delivery system. That, with this modest $30 million surplus, we are mostly just shoring up existing services that are being performed today and trying to make them ongoing in the budget. So and except for in a very few areas, and I think Jim talked about it, like in our urban forest plan, we're really not enhancing services with this budget. So there's not going to be, we are trying to, obviously, with housing, with building some units and things like that, and operating our shelters. But there's not a lot of performance improvements in here. We're trying to hold steady. So I just don't want to get, we are in the service, I call it unstructured, we're in a structural deficit with our service delivery system vis-a-vis our budget, and it's going to take us a couple years to climb out of that. As long as the economy stays in our favor and we keep our revenues going and our costs in check. But that's something I think we all want, but I just want to make sure that I'm not raising expectations related to the performance and performance improvements in this particular budget, as we are, I would call, holding steady here and trying to get ourselves more structurally in balance.
I appreciate those constraints, and that's fair. I would say, even as revenue is only gradually and modestly increasing, I still think that part of the strategic part of the budgeting process is us having a conversation about being more productive, improving how we do things. Even if we're flat on funding, we should still be striving to, when we look at KPIs, in my opinion, we should be looking at how we think we can improve, even if it's 2, 3, 4% on something, even if the funding's flat. I think we should always be striving as part of this conversation to keep getting better.
Absolutely. I think we all agree with that for sure.
Okay. I haven't heard that really, that part of as you acknowledged a minute ago, I haven't quite heard that bubble up into this conversation. This feels like one of those moments for us as a council to get that strategic insight as to how we're constantly improving, where funding is a big piece of it, but probably not the entire story. Anyway, I appreciate all the work everyone's done, and my points are definitely more general about the future and not just public safety. So I'll stop there. But thank you, Jennifer and Councilmember Jimenez. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Jimenez.
I was going to call myself.
You got back.
I had a question, well, two questions. One is for Jim Shannon. On page 565, I think it talks about the 2023 through 2027 proposed capital improvement program. I think it's at the top is use of funds combined. In the middle of the page, construction projects. Under that is the South San Jose Police Substation closeout. I was hoping you can help me understand. I mean, it's not a lot of money, but I'm trying to understand what that is. Is it just simply remnants of when the substation was built that you're just sort of moving and closing out? And I have another question, so if you need a little time to
no, is that the capital budget you're in, or are you on the operating
yeah,
budget?
I'm in the capital budget, so I'm jumping, I think.
Yeah, we can maybe get to that on
Okay,
on
yeah,
Friday.
my apologies,
Thank you. But we are now ready for it.
Cool. Okay. So I do have a question though for Chief Mata, and it's sort of tied to some of the questions that Councilmember Foley was asking. Some of her questions brought to mind a policy that or something that we instituted some years back, I believe, and it was this clawback provision when folks go through the academy and then they go to another jurisdiction, a year later or whatever it may be. Does that still exist? I don't. And to whoever can answer, so Chief, if you know Chief Mata, if you know the answer.
I've seen it in some offer letters, and I'll defer to our.
Yeah, and I guess the reason I'm asking is, you know, the conversation was going towards some of the folks that leave maybe voluntarily or involuntarily through the field training officer portion of the training, and some of those folks, I'm wondering if those clawback provisions are still in place for those, and if we're getting back some of the money we've invested in them.
So the clawback provision, oh, it's Lisa Perez from the police department. The clawback provision was in place when we had a retention we paid or to bring people on board. And so if they did leave, they would have to pay that back. It's no longer in place. We don't have that retention bonus or the signing bonus. So it's not in place right now.
Okay, all
The
right.
results of the old clawback, I don't know off the top of my head. I don't think that we had anybody leave that had to return the money, but I'll have to double check. I can get back to you on
Okay.
that.
All right. And is there, you know, I know that was instituted in a different time, right? I'm wondering, is there any value to doing that? Would that be sort of a turnoff for some of the folks, the recruits that come through, to think that, you know, them being presented with such a thing, would that turn them away from, well, I don't really want to come here? Or?
We're not seeing the people leaving.
Okay.
Before we were seeing people leaving to go to other agencies, and that's why we wanted that retention so that they would stay on. We don't have those same issues. People, the attrition that the chief was talking about earlier really has to do with people not finishing the training because they're not ready for this job.
Right, I understand. So you're not, okay, so just things are uniquely different. But I guess one of the things that comes to mind as it relates to field training is, I think it was mentioned that some folks go through the process and it's clear once they're in the street, you know, live, if you will, right, dealing with the public and dealing with, you know, folks that you all deal with, that some of them just don't cut it. Once they're in the field training, let's just say, how long does field training last, for example? And to anyone, I don't know.
Yeah, our FTO's training program is a little over 3 months.
Okay,
almost
so
4 months.
so if like after month one they don't do well, whether it be, you know, someone in the police department says, you know, this person just isn't going to cut it, can they then go to a different department, meaning like to the city of Santa Clara, and essentially transfer the academy and everything they did, even though it's run by SJPD, and essentially plug and play there? Is that, how does that work?
Like this button's, there it goes. So if somebody leaves our agency before they've completed a probationary period, it's unlikely they would go to another agency straight away. They would have to go back through an academy. So POST requires you to complete an academy to get your post level 1 certificate, and then you have to complete a probationary period. So if they don't make it through our academy, yes, they could go to another agency, but they would have to go back through some training. We do not see that happening as much. We don't see officers leaving to go to other agencies like we did before, so we're not having those issues.
Okay.
People aren't completing the training because they're not cutting it. And so we will try our best to train them, to give them additional help, but if they're just not reaching the level that we want them to, then we will give them that opportunity to resign. But we're not seeing them leave, and agencies won't typically just take them from there.
Okay, all right, cool. That answers my question, but okay, thank you.
Councilor, if I could get back to your question, actually, yeah, so that little $50,000 or so is really, so there's been a lot of trailing issues related to sort of the contractor closeout and legal costs related to that construction project a number of years ago. So that's just sort of a few trailing items. I think the bigger thing with the substation is that we do have, as part of our 5-year forecast, the expectation that the substation is fully activated once the police training center comes online. All the training that's happening at the substation moves to that new facility. So that approximately now, I mean, it's a couple years out, but that $2 million ongoing operating cost is built into our 5-year forecast. It's built into those surplus numbers that you saw when I talked about that yesterday.
Okay, all right, thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you. Officer, Councilmember Arenas. Excuse me, Councilmember, I just assigned you to the police department.
Well, it's a good thing my sister is a detective, not in this city, but you're not far from that truth, Mayor. All right, so I have a couple of questions. I'll just start with something very general about how we are beginning to use our resources to budget for additional recruitment. Is that happening both in the fire and in police?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember. Yes, we do have some funding for our background and our recruiting. This is one-time personal service funding for that. I think it's $895,000. And that's for department-wide, not just officers. It's used for our communication specialists, public safety dispatchers, crime and intelligence analysts, recruiting throughout the whole department. And that's what we're using that monies for.
Okay, and this is, I'm gonna guess, on top of, is this something that was holding us maybe back a bit, is the background checks for the many applicants?
No, I don't see us holding back with that. I mean, that's something that we also, part of the funding is to provide additional background investigators or for funding for the investigators. But that's not, holding us back in terms of conducting the background checks and recruiting and hiring. This is just supporting, to continue to support our efforts in recruiting and backgrounding.
And Chief, this is Jim Shannon. If I could just jump in there. So one of the items that have been one-time funded for a number of years is both the police hire ahead program and the one-time funding for recruiting and backgrounding. And so that's $7.5 million for the hire ahead program, $900,000 for the recruiting and backgrounding to sort of keep up with the level of academies that hire ahead program generates. So that'll be one of our challenges over sort of the next few budget cycles, to try to bring that into the ongoing budget as much as we can, because we know we have to have those academies filled in and staffed. And so just another example of the challenges of the sort of the one-time service levels that we have out there that are really ongoing, that we'll still need to deal with in 23, 24 and beyond.
Okay, got it. Okay, so we probably could see ourselves doing this maybe one more time. And how about for you, Chief Sapien? How are you spending the resources for additional recruitment?
Thank you, Council Member. The Fire Department proposed budget adds 1 analyst and 1 staff specialist, and those additions will result in increased capacity to support multiple recruitments at a time. Right now, our bandwidth is very narrow, and so we have to sequence recruitments, which sometimes delays the process.
Well, that's good to hear. You said 1 analyst and
1 staff specialist.
And staff specialist. Well, that's good to hear. Awesome. Okay. I'm going to tag on to some of this conversation that was had at the beginning about performance goals and the measures that we're using under the outcomes that we have for specifically for public safety. And I think it's no secret that I'm going to ask about sexual assault. I've been keeping track of this, and I've got to say that I was back in I think it's 18 or 19. I was just very astonished at the closing rate for the cases that we use in order to tell us whether we're doing, how we're doing. That measures our level of success. And back then it was about 6.7. And now we are at a 13.8 and an estimate of 15.2. And so I've got to say that there's a lot of kudos here to be given to our police department and our investigative units for the work that they've been doing, for the level of improvements that they've had, for the diligence in the work I know that this is a difficult area to close cases in, but I'm really pleased. I'm really happy that there has been this growth, and every year there has been growth. I think we hovered around 8 to 10%, and to see it at an estimated 15% is really great. But it also leads me to my next question, which is, what is a best practice in terms of, and I know that I think you mentioned, Chief, or maybe it was Jennifer who mentioned that, this is something that you'll delve into a bit more in terms of determining what these measures look like. Because I don't know what the best practice is. What is that goal? Is our goal just to be, 5% better than we were the year before? What is that baseline? What is that? First of all, I guess, what is the best practice for a baseline and for a city of our size? And what is ultimately our goal? Where do we want to be? Because I don't see a 5-year goal here or target for 22, 23.
Yes, Councilmember, and I'm looking at page 298 of the
Yes.
Public Service CSA, where we have increased with the clearance rate for that. And the reason why we don't have a 5-year goal is that's something that we're going to be working on to see just exactly what you're asking about. What the other jurisdictions, what their rates are, what's a national rate, what's a acceptable rate. But our goal right now is to increase that rate like we're doing now. So that's something that we'll be working on to develop some type of baseline for that. And I don't know if our Deputy Chief of Investigations, L. Washburn, is here, because I know that they're always looking to improve all clearance rates for all cases. Oh, there she is.
Good morning, Deputy Chief L. Washburn with the Bureau of Investigations for the San Jose Police Department. Thank you for your question. Certainly, we are always seeking to, improve our solve and prosecution rate. One of the things that we do look at internally in our bureau are our quarterly program manager reports, whereby we have set goals as far as clearance rates, right? We're looking at prosecution and things of that nature. As the chief stated, the goal certainly is to continue to see an improvement in our prosecution rates. I think it's important to note that there is a correlation between, the staff and whether it be professional support staff and the sworn staff that we have in the investigation units. I believe in sexual assault specifically, we do have some vacancies as just one correlating factor. Certainly, having the advocacy readily available to provide that collaborative support when a detective is working with a survivor can lend itself in the long term towards successful prosecution, right? And helping to provide the support and wraparound services. And those are just, I think, two things that could potentially translate into higher clearance rates. Certainly, we are assigning the cases and working. I think the numbers have really gone down where we do not garner victim or survivor cooperation. And a lot of it has to do with the leadership in that unit. And I'm sure you are familiar with some of the efforts that we've done and the work that we've done, certainly with council on our work plan toward gender-based violence. So I hope I've provided some insights into how we might, analyze and reanalyze those efforts. And to the chief's point, taking a closer look at our program manager reports and some of those figures and matrices by which we, can try to bring those numbers up. I think that's something absolutely that we can take a look at.
Thank you, DC Washburn. I appreciate your perspective. I know that you've been working really hard. I want to recognize that that there's been quite a bit of work, a lot of movement, a lot of shifting, a lot of tools that have been incorporated. I think the leadership is the right leadership. I think under your leadership, we've had a lot of growth. I think under our chief Mata's leadership, there's been just some very wonderful growth. And so I am looking at what the kind of resources that you would need. And so as you're talking, you're telling me about the advocates on site. I think that, the research supports that. And the vacancies there, is there a specific, is there maybe a training or a recruitment issue that you're foreseeing here as being part of the issue in terms of vacancies? Or
I think not necessarily. When we look at the organization as a whole, we have staffing levels, and I think what it is there's a greater conversation here insofar as officer staffing. Certainly, the police department needs to provide resources to deliver on our core services. So first and foremost, when we have officers, they go into the Bureau of Field Operations, and to the extent that the department could supplant the authorized vacancies in investigations, they do so. We presently have approximately a 21% vacancy rate for authorized positions throughout the Bureau of Investigations. Fortunately, we have amazing staff that do bridge those gaps. And sometimes it is with overtime, and I know that's another conversation. So it's just, the overarching discussion is a matter of bringing the resources to the department as a whole, such that the department can then start to backfill those authorized vacancies, which we have been. Recently, we've put some positions or bodies back into patrol. So as they come out of the academy and get signed off, it's just, it's a slower process.
got it. Okay. And I'm sure the rotation, which takes a little bit longer, might also contribute to that. But well, let me get back to my original point that I'm ultimately want to make with these questions, and it is really, how do we determine when we need additional investigative services? And I would like to see what a baseline would be. I know that we're going to work towards defining what a baseline is and a target for that. I liken, and hold on, let me take it one step back, and this is only for rape. This is not all sexual assaults, right? And for me, I would like to see all sexual assaults listed here as part of a measure where that the public feels safe anywhere, anytime in San Jose. That rape is not the worst thing that can happen to a person. And that sexual assault really is part of what breaks some of those social threads in our community, in our society, and that have long-lasting impacts. And what I was going to say is that I liken rape to that kind of crime that is so hard to prevent and so hard to, and the survivors, a community that are very difficult to connect with. And this is part of what equity, the issue I have with some of our services in other areas, not only just public safety, is that the hardest to reach communities are the ones that need our support the most. And I know that our sexual assault survivors are the hardest to reach, but they're the survivors. They're the folks that we need to support the most. It's one thing to be burglarized and to have resources reorganized to meet those burglary needs. And I'm not trying to pit one crime against the other, but this is a crime against a person's body. And so for equity's sake, I want to know, Jennifer, how will we factor equity into these crimes that are listed, that we're telling our public, this is how you this is how we determine whether the public feels safe anywhere, anytime. And where our proposed budget changes on page 301, there isn't anything really other than the domestic violence high risk response team for $125,000 and the Children's Advocacy Center for $100,000. That these are the two ways that we are going to respond to this level of crime that is forgotten and so hard to solve for.
Yeah, so I thank you for the question, Councilmember Arenas. So first of all, as far as racial equity goes, we are, on our racial equity journey. For this particular year, we're actually embedding or recommending to embed a few positions in our outwardly facing departments, and police is one of them. A position that you'll see in the proposed budget to help focus on making sure we're accelerating our equity efforts in certain departments that are large and complex and have many different lines of businesses within their departments. As far as the investments here, given our limited resources, we tried to continue to move forward on the priority areas that you're discussing, because we do need to be relentless on them. The department is working very hard, and we are, reporting obviously to PISFIS on a regular basis about this. So these were the investments given we thought were the best, highest use given how tight our budget was in this fiscal year. But obviously, in this area and many others, we can do more, but we just absolutely have to be smarter in how we're working on this and continue to make the improvements within our existing staff and keep our staff filled, which the department has done a good job in this area. We are going to be presenting a manager's budget addendum as directed on a small, practical police staffing plan that hopefully can be added in future forecasts to keep the department accelerating in certain areas where we need to staff up. And so that will be hopefully released in the next week or so. And we will be talking about where we need to have staff and where we can make some investments for the future. It's just that this is where our best recommendations given the tightness and all of the competing priorities. And this is absolutely a very high priority, as you know, that I've personally been committed to this one.
Yes, no, and I'm absolutely grateful. I think that part of that improvement from 6.7 closure rate to the estimated 15.2% closure rate that we're estimating for 2021-22 is definitely it's a line. It traces a line back to your leadership, Jennifer. You may not be the one solving the cases, but you're solving for some of the policy issues, which are equally important. And you have helped solve for many of policy issues. And so I'm absolutely grateful to you for that. The issue here for me is that out of 18 million that we are adding, we have 278,000 and 497,000 that we are dedicating additionally to this issue area. And so right off the top of my head, I would say this is not equity. If we want to talk about equity, these are the crimes that young Latinas are being impacted. Prevention and having the best benefit of of having our monies spent and the resources in the right areas, this is where it's at. And we're overlooking it. And I'm letting everybody know, and our colleagues included, and mayor included, that we're overlooking this and we're going to pay for this generation upon generation upon generation. So either we invest now, or we're going to continue with this cycle of violence, of sexual violence, for years to come, for generations to come. And the policy issues that we're advancing now will be all for naught if the money isn't there for us, if the money isn't there for our investigative units. And I am all for our foot patrols downtown in high needs neighborhoods. I want to make sure that people feel safe downtown and other parts of our city. But I also want our young girls to be safe, to feel safe, and to know that there's going to be some closure rates, and that there's going to be investment in them equally as there is investment into burglaries and whatever happens, whatever mayhem happens in the downtown and other high needs areas. And this budget so far does not reflect that.
Thank you. Councilmember, do you have anything further?
Other than to ask for a greater investment in this area to be finally done in this budget season, Mayor, I don't know what else I could add.
Right. Thank you. Councilmember Pearls?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just a question for Police Chief in regards to the 16 new positions for foot patrol. Chief, are those going to be, is that just sort of the equivalent of 16 positions? Is it going to be funding for it? And we're still going to be requiring people to sign up for overtime? Or will there be, as you described, 4 officers that say bid for and have a permanent assignment of foot patrol in each division?
Sure. So the 16 will be, our intention is to these be permanent positions once the officers come on board for that. In the meantime, we are going to continue with foot patrols in the different areas through overtime. So once these 16 come on board, the intention is this is to replace the overtime. That's why it's we looked at what we can do to help our 4 divisions, and we came up with the 16 deployment model, and that's something that we also have to look at in terms of supervising these individuals as well in the future. So right now, once we establish and have these 16, they would be working with a current sergeant, but our intention is to make this a separate unit, so to speak, for each division.
Okay, thank you. So I guess just to understand it more clearly, is it going to be, well, I guess timing wise, when exactly is that going to happen? You said once they get on board. So are we talking about a couple of years from now, once hiring improves, or what? Maybe you can give a better idea on timeline.
Sure. So the timeline is a year and a half. We're going to hire them and put them on board, the extra 16. And as been mentioned, we have the other priorities here in the department as well as patrol. But once we hire individuals, it will be deployed to this, the downtown foot patrol. I think in the actual budget document, I think it says that it'll take about 12 to 14 months to deploy this.
And you described, though, 4 officers per division. So that would be 4 officers for Central, correct? There wouldn't be any more. So it wouldn't be 16 for downtown.
That's correct. It's 4 for each division. So 4 for Central, 4 for Western, Foothill, and Southern.
And the idea would be it could be deployed anywhere within the division. And so maybe even the wording of it is not totally correct then anymore, right? It's not just downtown foot patrol. This is just citywide foot patrol.
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I understand the constraints and realities on staffing, and I just want to make sure that it's very clear for those in our community, because I know there's many within the downtown core that initially saw this and they're you know, assuming maybe that upon approval of the budget, all of a sudden we're going to have you know, a dozen or so officers patrolling permanently in the downtown. And so I just wanted to make it very clear through the conversation today, and then that way we can message it correctly that that's not what it's going to be. It's going to take some time. We're still going to have overtime funded positions. It's contingent upon you hiring and getting more staff in general. And then even when that does happen, we're talking about spreading the 16 citywide, and so 4 in the central division. And ultimately, I would say, you know, this is a good start, but it's still going to be insufficient for creating, I think, the kind of robust foot patrol unit, if you will, but just foot patrols that could really benefit our community, what we've seen through the overtime deployment. So I think that it's a good step in the right direction, but obviously nowhere near completed. And obviously some that will need some more funding and resources in the future as we continue to build up your department. And speaking of that, I know there's supposed to be right the progression through the manager's budget addendum for 5 years, and so just maybe you can speak to that, either Chief or Jennifer, on how that will help us to continue to increase the numbers.
Yeah, so maybe I just want to thank you, Councilmember Perales. Just to clarify on the foot patrols, and we say in downtown and high needs neighborhoods because that's the program that was funded in the past. So it will be data driven even in the divisions to look at the high crime areas. With approval of this proposal, it does do things. It's while we're hiring these people, while we're hiring the new staff, the 16 staff, which will be in the next academy, when they come out, they won't be going to general patrol or to some other places in the departments. With approval of this proposal, they will go directly into this program if council approves it. But we need to have some bridge money, so that's why we've got the one-time overtime while they're training. So we do expect the full implementation of this program on an ongoing, regular shift basis. 10-hour shifts, 7 days a week will happen in the 12 to 14 month period on a regular basis, filled, not on an overtime basis. So just want to be very clear on that. And then as far as the your second question related to the police staffing plan, we're coming up with the concept that you know, as we've been directed to come up with a plan. It will be a modest plan that we think that we'll put into the budget that, in my mind, we'll be recommending that we add it as part of a committed addition to each forecast. So it'll automatically become part of the forecast unless the council decides in any given year that we can't afford it, but it's going to be modest so it can be hopefully afforded in each year. You know, I've been around a long time, and we had very big staffing plans that kind of, I'm just going to say, died under their own weight because we couldn't afford them, and then we ended up having to unfund them. We'd put them in the budget, then have to take it away, and I think that's really hard on the community and the police department and our council to have high hopes that we're going to be able to fund something, then have to turn around and reduce it because we ultimately couldn't afford it in our forecast. So we're going to try to reverse that, come up with some modest numbers, and hopefully that there'll be ones that we can sustain and commit to, even if our budget outlook isn't as positive in the future, that it's modest enough that we can all commit to, that it won't unravel the budget in other places if we continue with the commitment. So that's what we're working for. I don't have the exact numbers, but we will describe some of the priority areas that we would like these positions to initially go into, and that would obviously be up for debate and discussion in each budget cycle, but we'll give you a sense, but that'll be up to each year's decision by the city council on the deployment of those, but we will give you some of the priority areas in any given year of where we'd like to go with them. Like this year, for example, is we've put the money toward, or we've put some money in the budget towards new staffing for foot patrols and for the MCAP program. And we will give you that sense of where we need to shore up the police department with some modest additions. But the intent is to, if with this MBA, if you approve our concept, we would actually put it in our forecast, and it becomes part of the base budget of every year that we get these ads, and they're built into our cost of doing business in all future years.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think obviously, as you pointed out, this is a very unique time where we actually see a forecast 5 years out with some modest surpluses. And so baking in some modest additions to staff, I think is important. And I will certainly be supportive of that. Something I've been very interested in continuing to rebuild to at least get back to where we were. Last question, back to the chief then. Is this going to ultimately be a position that officers will bid for, or will this be assigned a different way?
We're still working on that. We intend to assign officers that are proactive, both in the community or with the community, and also with community engagement as well. So we're still looking at that, council member, to see if they would be biddable, or we assigned the officers that have demonstrated that there were commitment to the community, both in the engagement level and also through crime reduction, is something that we want to see.
Okay, yeah, I know that each of your division captains gave some really positive remarks at our PIS committee when we heard back on a report of how the foot patrol was going in each of the divisions. And I would be interested as well on their feedback on, do they believe that a shift, part of, bidding for the shift is going to be the best way to find the right people, or do they think that there's another way and where they'd want to assign individuals as you just described? And so I'd be interested as well on their feedback on how best to assign officers or get officers to work these roles. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Davis?
Thank you. Chief, I'd really like to hear the thinking behind why we're adding so much to foot patrol as opposed to our traffic enforcement, when, as far as I know, our traffic deaths, our traffic related fatalities are much higher than our other fatalities in any other crime related statistic in the entire city. Why are we adding, and I'm not saying we don't need foot patrol, but what you told us about the staffing for traffic enforcement when Councilmember Foley was asking about it, it sounded like we don't even have weekend traffic enforcement in the nighttime. When are the deaths happening? And when is our traffic enforcement unit on duty? And if we need more, which you've already said we do, why are we prioritizing foot patrol over traffic enforcement?
Thank you, Councilmember. The foot patrols were something that we were looking at to curb the overtime positions that we have on foot patrol. Your point is well taken that we need additional traffic enforcement officers, and they are not available on the weekend, as you mentioned. I gave the dates and times that they're on duty. One of the things that we're doing in the meanwhile, we look to increase this unit through officers that are being released. We will add officers as they come available, not only to the traffic enforcement, but the other agency, other units within the department. One of the things that we're doing right now is, like you mentioned, when these incidents are happening, they're not vehicle collisions, vehicle on vehicle. The latest are vehicle with pedestrians. So our patrol units during those times are also proactively going out and providing patrols that otherwise would be done by our traffic enforcement units. So they are making stops, they are monitoring those areas that in their divisions that have a high incidence of collisions, specifically the fatalities. So until we fully staff our traffic enforcement unit, our patrol officers will also be tasked with addressing those issues there. In terms of priorities, I mean, we have priorities throughout the department. And foot patrols was one of the ones that in this budget was funded.
And if I could just add as well on this one, Councilmember Davis, we were directed through the council approval of the March budget message to deal with this because we've had trouble filling the positions on overtime, and so we were like trying to get them into an ongoing basis. And as the chief says, we have 30 authorized positions in traffic enforcement unit, if I recall correctly, and we're trying to fill those up as they come out of the academy. And then that is a high priority area for us, and I think you'll see us address that with this, at least as a conceptual, with a staffing plan of where that's a high priority to go to, because couldn't agree more.
My understanding in the March budget message, and I could be wrong, I don't have it in front of me at the moment, is that the request for 16 officers was not 16 officers all to be deployed for foot patrol. It was for some of them to be deployed for downtown foot patrol. So again, my question is, when we know that we already have over 30 traffic related fatalities in this city in this year, in the first quarter of this year, why are we not adding immediately to foot patrol? We don't have foot patrol right now. We do not have foot patrol any day of the week, or we don't have traffic enforcement any day of the week after 8 p.m. It's not even dark at 8 p.m. and most of the fatalities are happening after dark. At the very least, why are we not changing the shifts? I understand that we have people who are out on regular patrol doing traffic stops, but those are also the times when we have the most 911 calls. That's why we have patrol at night. I feel like we're not taking the deaths seriously. We need to be more nimble than this. We need to at least change the shifts. Why are we not doing that?
So let me start. You're right. The mayor's March budget message did not designate the number of position, but in order to keep it funded as intended, the 16 number is the number that we put forward. Again, because we've got vacancies in that unit, we didn't want to add more to that unit until we fill up what we've got and understand our capacity. Just recently, at least in the last year, and we can pull that out and maybe send and put some narrative through an MBA council member, but and I'll let the chief talk about it more. We did actually, at the request of PISFIS, look at the shifts. And they did break up and did some changes to the shifts to have coverage based on what they thought the need was. And so they did reorient that. It may need some more work. I'll let the chief talk about that. But that was something that we did put forward and talked about at PISFIS, at least when I was the assistant city manager in the last year. But chief, can you talk a little bit more about that? And then if we need to give more information to you, we can certainly just put out an MBA and discuss how that shifts. But you're right, we constantly need to look at the coverage and where we think we can have the biggest impact to reduce our traffic deaths, because it is quite concerning.
Yes, and just to add to that, we do targeted enforcement in these high collision intersections. On a monthly basis, TEU receives information from our crime analysis unit regarding these vehicle collisions in the city. And as you mentioned, council member, we don't have enough. That's why patrol picks up the slack in that regard. But what I want to highlight is what traffic enforcement does, right? It's not just out there citing or going in these targeted areas where these collisions happen. They do DUI checkpoints. They do DUI saturation patrols. They do distracted driving enforcement. In addition to the regular traffic enforcement, they do motorcycle safety, educating riders on traffic safety. They do bicycle pedestrian safety. They run programs such as Click It or Ticket. They participate in the street racing. They also do know your limit presentations on driving while intoxicated. They do traffic safety education. They do go out and work with DOT to partner with them to provide education to our community in terms of safety during nighttime hours. We participate in the Vision Zero program. They deploy the radar trailers in addition to their community engagement. So in addition to what they're being asked to do, we are proactive in these efforts. And like I mentioned, we know that we're short, and once we have officers to assign to the traffic enforcement unit, we will. And this is, and I get your point, that council member, is we need to look at the deployment model and see how we can provide coverage there. And again, not having enough officers, we're going to use our patrol officers, and that's what the captains have been doing in each division, looking at those specific areas to provide more visibility.
Thank you. I'm going to have to sign off, and I fear in the same way that Councilmember Arenas did. I appreciate all of that, Chief and Jennifer, but I have heard that it's going to take 1.5 years for you to fully staff the foot patrol, because you're going to bring them as they come out of academy. You're going to bring them directly to foot patrol rather than to regular patrol. And what I'm not hearing is that you have that plan to fully staff the traffic enforcement unit. And you mentioned all the things that they do. Clearly, we don't have enough staffing in that area. You've already admitted that. What I don't hear is a plan for fully staffing that unit. And we're now at a place where deaths are, I think, skyrocketing is fair to say. And we're not changing what we're doing. The sideshows mostly happen either at night or on the weekends. We have no traffic enforcement officers. You said that they help with street racing. Well, how can they help with street racing when the sideshows aren't happening at that time that they're on duty? I understand all of the education pieces that they do, which is great, but people are still dying on our streets. So I don't feel like I got a satisfactory answer in how we have a plan for fully staffing that unit.
Chief, would you like to respond, Jennifer?
Sure, I'll respond. All these positions take bodies. We need bodies. So as we get bodies, officers that are street ready, we will deploy them accordingly to all vacancies throughout the department, and TEU is one of them.
And perhaps we can either talk offline a little bit about the deployment of them and the times and why you've selected the times, or perhaps we can put it in an MBA if that's better for you, council member, to explain why their deployment is across the days of the week and the time, and then how they fill in a little bit more specifically on paper for the times that you're concerned about. Would that be helpful?
Tell me when the deaths are happening versus when TEU is on duty.
Yeah, and that's that's what we're trying to match it the best we can through data. It's very difficult, and they're trying to go to those intersection areas that, as the chief did. But we can put some information out so you can understand their deployment model a little bit more thoroughly, as was described to the Public Safety Committee, and then any updates that they're contemplating related to that. I think hopefully that would be somewhat helpful.
Thank you.
And I understand I understand the frustration. Don't get me wrong.
Thank you.
Councilmember Esparza?
Thank you, Mayor. I actually wanted to follow up on some of the comments around foot patrols, and then had a question around fire. So first off, on foot patrols, I'd like to thank the mayor for his support of foot patrols. My district is in 3 different police divisions, and I have some very, very active areas in each of those divisions in my district, and foot patrols have been really helpful in addressing some of the challenges around violence and preventing that as well in my district. I did want to follow up. So I think it's a very important tool, particularly for communities like those in District 7 to get to know those officers and build that rapport, which has been helpful. I did want to follow up because I actually really wanted to thank PD, Captain, through an effort led by Captain Shab, but it was the police department who went out in after now analyzing a lot of some of the deaths that have been happening at night around Coyote Creek. Again, not in crosswalks or with a light, but we've had some fatalities on the streets around Coyote Creek at night. Unfortunately, with our unhoused residents. And it was PD that went out into the creek to do outreach, that handed out vests, that went out and talked to folks and said, hey, look, your unhoused neighbors here are getting killed. Like, please, and we'll be out there to have some more visibility. But it was PD that did that. It was not DOT. It was not our homeless outreach teams. And so I wanted to ask Jennifer, ask the city manager a question around if we really do analyze those fatalities, do we have staffing in other departments that are appropriate to do some of that outreach? If we're really looking at how to be effective in some of these areas, how can we utilize the tools that we already have and that we already have budgeted, right? We're looking at adding resources to address homelessness. How can we deploy those resources to this end?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And again, so not to too much jump ahead, but in the city roadmap exercise that we're going to do on Monday, we actually have made a new category called Safer San Jose, and to specifically call out these issues. And I didn't unfortunately mention it when Councilmember Davis was speaking, but it's related to this exactly thing. We have an item called, it's Vision Zero, and we really need to get a comprehensive work plan because this is a super high priority, and we need to figure out, with a deputy city manager overseeing it, how do we take our resources and use them effectively across the organization to get at this, because it's absolutely unacceptable and concerning, and our safety of our residents is our number one priority. So we're going to be looking at the questions that you're raising, along with the questions that Councilmember Davis is raising just about traffic safety in general. So there'll be more to come, but we need to have a concentrated effort on it, so we've put that on the roadmap. I don't have specific answers on that now, but we need to use our existing resources to, without just adding new to, and prioritize them over to this the best we can.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And so my second question is for Chief Sapien. And we've had some discussions around our dire need around paramedics. Can you talk to me about your plans on addressing that issue?
Thank you, council member. As I'm sure you recall from our discussions, the shortage of licensed paramedics is a statewide, and I'm not as familiar, but I'm guessing a national issue with the beginning stages of COVID in early 2020. Most paramedic schools across the state stopped classroom delivery, internships were ceased, and thus completion of all the requirements necessary for licensure was slowed. And so in our recent history, we have a greater than 2-year gap in the development of licensed paramedics. That has hit many agencies across the state very hard, and I would say recently with increased attrition here in the city of San Jose, with the resulting promotions, we have also lost quite a few paramedics in the firefighter rank. To answer your question, there is no budget action proposed towards that problem. We are already funded for the positions that are paramedic. Currently, our strategy is to accelerate hiring to fill vacancies as soon as possible, focusing on available candidates in our hiring pool that are licensed paramedics. I don't see a resolve to this in the short term. I think this is a medium and long-term challenge. And I think we may need to look at bigger strategies such as post-hire training to the paramedic level in the medium to long term if this challenge persists. I will add that that strategy also has some benefits relative to diversity hiring because we can create a broader pool of available candidates or a more diverse pool of available candidates who could receive paramedic training. So right now, the short answer to your question is accelerated and targeted hiring.
And would that additional training for existing firefighters, that would require a budget action, correct?
That would require budget action. We would be taking people out of their assigned positions in the field while they receive that training, and therefore we would have to backfill with overtime for those vacancies.
And are we looking at any potential incentives or other budgetary impacts or ways to address some of the mandatory overtime that we have and the impacts from that to our workforce around our paramedics? And then, the overtime has been pretty extreme, and I know you've made some changes there. Are there anything that we need to do? Is there anything that we need to do that would have a budgetary impact?
Thank you, Council Member. Not at this time. The strategies that we've employed thus far internally have been to expand the number of what are called support paramedics, which are licensed paramedics who are not in the firefighter rank, and that increased number allows them to fill vacancies in either short-term or even full shift periods, and that has served to ease some of the overtime. But like I said, I think this challenge is going to endure for a period. I don't know of incentive programs that would ease the overtime burden because we are a minimum staffing based department, which means we put the same number of people on duty every day with the same skill sets. And so we really have to manage the minimization of mandatory overtime as best we can.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you. Appreciate all the good questions from my colleagues. Councilmember Jimenez, did you have your hand up from before?
No, I have a new question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It's for Chief Seppian. As we know, there was a large fire at the Home Depot store not too long ago. Obviously, everyone there, including the fire, especially the fire department, did an excellent job. What I know about large events, say the floods, say other things that the city has dealt with, that sometimes during these large events that don't happen too often, you sort of discover maybe, you discover some successes, and you also discover maybe some shortcomings in the department, things that could have been done differently, things of that nature. I'm curious if there's anything that was discovered via the fire department's response to that that can maybe, that you felt maybe can be changed, or maybe expose some things that need to be added and things of that nature. And I'm asking you in the context, obviously, during the budget, right? And so I was wondering if you can share your thoughts on anything that came of that, to the extent you've gone through and sort of analyzed sort of the response and such. And by the way, the reason I'm asking is on slide 7, I see the arson unit staffing, right? And so obviously that's important, and that brought to mind the fire. And that's why I'm curious if you think that there's anything maybe that's not in the budget that should be in the budget as it relates to responding to those type of events in the future.
Thank you, council member. Yes, an event like the Home Depot fire puts a pretty tremendous strain and tests the elasticity of our organization's ability to absorb it. We are fortunate to be able to rely somewhat on our mutual aid partners, in this case within the county, to help backfill where we've had resources committed to the incident. I think to your question specifically, I would say I don't think I felt that I discovered anything new, but certainly confirmed a couple things that I knew. One of which is we have a very lean arson unit, minimally staffed, and so this proposed budget works to at least shore up a little bit what is a pretty high need for the organization. The second thing that I would say was confirmed almost immediately, and actually is on a regular basis, is that our span of control for our overhead positions, which in the field are our battalion chiefs, is stretched very thin very early. And in fact, for a period of time, I had to step in and assume command of that incident so that we could try to free up others to maintain coverage across the city. And so we have been modeling the addition of a new battalion to improve span of control across the city, provide better oversight, and I think most importantly, better depth to overhead coverage when we are stretched as thin as we were during the Home Depot fire.
Is it, to Chief Mata's response to an earlier question, is it just a matter of getting more bodies into the organization, right, as it relates to the span of control and so you don't have to step in essentially to provide coverage?
For that particular question, I would say it would be, we've modeled it with 3 new positions, and what that would achieve is smaller geographical areas of coverage for battalions, and then greater depth of overhead. And so, as you can imagine, the high-risk nature of a fire like Home Depot required attention to the fire. It required attention to downwind occupancies due to embers moving across and creating smaller fires. It required attention to the hazardous materials contained in that building, and a lot of attention to personnel safety. And so with the 5 battalion chiefs that are on duty on a daily basis, they get eaten up and committed very early, and we're out of positions. So to answer your question, would it be additional in what we've modeled? It would be 3 additional positions.
Yeah, and And the challenges you had with that particular fire, were they, was any of that due to vacancies within the department? Not necessarily not having enough sort of filled, well, yeah, I guess I see vacancies as uniquely different than just being fully staffed and not, and realizing maybe we need more folks, right? But
I would say no. Like I said earlier, we use a minimum staffing model, which means every day I assign the same number of personnel to be on duty, whether we have them or not, which means we have to force overtime sometimes. So our normal deployment levels were there. This would require additional positions added.
okay. And then the other question, so the arson unit staffing is 309,000. Is that one person, two people? Is that, what is that?
That will be one additional arson investigator. Currently, we're deployed on a 3-shift basis, just like the rest of the field. So A shift, B shift, and C shift. And we have 3 arson investigators authorized in the budget. And so when someone is on vacation or on a short-term vacancy, or even when we have vacancies, we have periods of time where there is no coverage, and we either have to bring in the supervising arson captain on call, or sometimes we have to rely on the frontline fire captains to try to make a determination of fire cause and determine whether we should call in someone to cover arson. So what this proposal will do is give us a little more depth to be able to provide relief staffing when we have those types of absences.
So would it be essentially be a fourth?
It would be a
Yeah,
fourth.
okay, all right. Well, I would just say that, you know, some of the, well, the fires and many of the things that the police department interacts with and sort of faces or unpredictable events that we just don't know are before us. And so I think obviously this falls under public safety. And so I would just say, Jennifer, to the extent we can explore and see if we can shore up some of these critical sort of pieces to what public safety does, I think, you know, I'd be interested in seeing. The other thing I would just say, and just to conclude my comments, is that I know there was some back and forth about, you know, foot patrol and traffic, or the traffic, you know, the motors unit in police department and such. And I think, in my mind, what I heard was just a very real conversation about the competing interest, right? There not being enough money to do everything, and trying to figure out sort of where the best sort of place to park the money is, if you will. And so I think that's just the inherent nature of what we're doing, and that's the difficult aspect of what we do here every Tuesday, and especially during the budget times. And so just wanted to acknowledge that all that, whether it's sexual assault, whether it's traffic safety, whether it's foot patrols, I see all that as very important, but that is the challenge that we have before us, to try to figure that out. So, but I appreciate all your efforts, and you're certainly, I think, every resident would agree that this area of what the city does, public safety, is one of the most important in the city. So thank you for your efforts. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Jimenez. I agree. These are all important priorities in there. We have a scarce number of resources, and these are difficult, challenging decisions. Chief, I just wanted to follow up and say first, thank you. As a former sexual assault prosecutor, spent several years working with the SAIU. It's good to see, you know, on page 678 that sexual assaults investigations is now the largest investigation unit. And you've gone from 15.7 million in funding to 17.2, and now have 57 FTE employees assigned there. So I'm glad to see that you have bolstered that investigations unit, as well as family violence and other important areas of investigation. Can I ask a question? The special investigations, what falls under special investigations?
Sure, our special investigations unit is our intelligence unit, our vice unit. Primarily, those are the ones there.
Intel and vice. Okay.
But we also, I don't see it here, but we broke down the sexual assaults unit into the special victims unit, which I don't know if that's included in that, or I think it's still in the sexual assaults unit. But special investigation unit is the ones under the chief of police.
Okay, so
detail.
Okay, got it. So the The new designation that was created a couple years ago, you think that's within sexual assault?
I'll check with my finance.
Okay. If someone's, looks like Chief Washburn's around now. Welcome back.
Hi, Lisa Perez again.
Hi, Lisa.
Yeah, so sexual assaults does include the SVU. It
Okay.
was renamed, we can rename it in the budget book differently, but it does include all the sexual assault units, and the special investigation includes all our covert units as well.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very helpful. I noticed that the numbers and the personnel increased quite a bit around school liaison, truancy abatement, as well as school safety. And I know that, and I'm looking again on the same page, 678, that describes the department summary, the budget summary. And I know there've been some, I guess, publicized episodes of school boards saying that we don't want to pay for San Jose PD, or, I mean, this is happening throughout the country, we know. School districts insisting that they will or not pay. And I'm just trying to understand, does this increase in spending here, essentially we're going in school safety from 835,000 to 3.3 million, and then from 528,000, I'm looking at column 1 from 2021 all the way up to the proposed to 2.1 million. Very large increases, and I'm just trying to understand, is that the same number of officers and staff and they're just being funded by us, or what exactly is happening there?
So the school safety program is the, I believe it's the crossing guards.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Program.
So that's just crossing guards.
Right, and then the school liaison tabs unit. Yeah, those are our officers that are assigned to the school liaison unit with the tabs unit. I'll let our financial expert.
Oh,
If
I
could
got
just
it.
jump in real quick. So what you're looking at is the actual expenses.
Yeah.
So during COVID, schools were closed.
Got it.
And at home, so the
That explains it.
Yes, that's why the
Okay, so we
difference,
didn't need
but
folks
the
there.
resource level hasn't changed.
Okay, got it. Okay, I was trying to understand why the big numbers. That makes lots of sense. Okay, thank you for all that. And Lisa, I appreciate the fact that you're in the middle of all these numbers, because these are this is voluminous stuff here. On the TEU, the traffic enforcement issue, which I agree is a very important and serious one. We have, what is it, 11 or 12 vacancies? Help me, Chief, I know that number's moving around.
Yeah, we have 3 sergeant vacancies and 9 officer vacancies.
All right, so it's 12 vacancies total.
Right.
So, as I understand it, our first priority has to be filling those vacancies, right? If we just allocate more money in the budget to more positions, that just gives you more vacancies. It doesn't give us more enforcement. Is that fair to say?
Right, the positions are there, so the funding's there. We just need the bodies to fill these.
Okay. So it seems to me the solution to this problem isn't a budgetary solution. It's an HR and deployment solution.
That's correct.
Okay. How quickly can we get those vacancies filled?
That's something that we'll have to take a look at in terms of how many officers are going to be released from the FTO program.
Right.
So they go into patrol, and then we get the bodies from patrol to.
Is that something that you could report back to us either through?
Sure.
Let's put it in
MBA
let's
or-
put that in the MBA and make
Right.
an estimate what the community can expect in that area.
Yeah, I think we're all very concerned about that, and Councilmember Davis's concerns are well placed. But we want the solution that is fastest, and I suspect that's going to be an HR solution. In fact, I know it is, because the budgetary solution is just going to add vacancies to a unit that needs people. And then could you help me understand this? I thought we had a special street racing or sideshow unit of some kind, some special detail that was created. Is that within TEU or within patrol, or how is that?
So it's a combination. It's funding that was allocated to us for overtime to bring people on board. So it's a combination of officers on patrol, TEU, and others that are available to address those issues. When officers sign up for that, if we don't have enough, then we have to utilize patrol, our patrol resources to address the side shows. But
Right.
the funding that was allocated to us is again for overtime to bring in officers to address those issues like some of the tactics and information gathering to deploy our resources there.
I assume that's a nighttime, like a graveyard or swing shift assignment. Is that right? It's not a daytime assignment?
No, yes, it's pretty much an evening right between swing shift and midnights, but primarily they work throughout midnight until we disperse all the 200 or 300 plus vehicles.
Right. Okay. So that's operating at nighttime. I'm just trying to understand sort of what's out there at nighttime. And then, of course, our patrol officers are out there at nighttime. And we know that they're swamped responding to high priority calls. And I'm just wondering from just a practical operational standpoint, an officer's out there at 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, and you say patrolling in Councilmember Foley's district, for example, and they're seeing somebody driving 52 on a 35-mile-an-hour road. Is it likely that the officer is going to be able to have the bandwidth to go pull over that driver, or is it more likely that they're on a call and they're not going to be able to? I'm just trying to understand to what extent patrol is ever a solution to this problem.
Well, like any other incidents, if they're available, yes, that they will. In that scenario that you provided, if they're not on a call and they see that, they're expected to take enforcement action. And that's why a lot of the captains in their divisions, we realize that this is a priority. They have deployed officers in those specific areas to make those stops and contact those stops to reduce any traffic enforcement violations.
Okay. And I know this is a difficult thing to quantify, so I won't ask you to, but perhaps in the NBA, if you could give us, when this call comes back, give us some awareness of to what extent patrol is or is not part of the solution at nighttime in terms of traffic enforcement. If it's the case that everybody's overwhelmed because they've got to respond to the latest 911 call, I get it. If it's the case that we're actually seeing a significant number of enforcement actions at that time, that would be helpful just to know.
Sure.
Thank
we
you,
can add
Chief.
that to that.
And then finally, it looks like there's a significant reduction on the strategic support side over on pages 679 around IT, information technology, as well as training in the academy. And my understanding is we still have 3 academies. Is that right?
Yes.
Is that an outlier? It looks as though we went from almost 21 million to 14 million on training in the academy. And I know that there were different classes being moved around different years, and if that's just an anomaly, I'll let it go. I'm just wondering if we're actually reducing.
Mayor, this is Jim Shannon, as the chief is looking. I think those are primarily some one-time things. I know for the information technology piece, we had some mobile data computer replacement as part of that budget.
Oh, right.
And so that was the piece there. And then I suspect the training and academy was also either a one-time investment that may have been rebudgeted in that year. I know we're not making any reductions as part of this budget here.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for answering all my questions. Councilmembers Mahan and Arenas, you both have your hands up, but I suspect that's from before.
Yeah, sorry, Mayor.
Okay. Okay, great. Then
Mayor,
we'll go.
I do have additional questions.
Yeah, Councilmember Arenas.
Oh, are you done?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So one of the items that I was thinking about as I ended my comments earlier was about how we deal with vacancies. And I don't know if we are just kind of pushing things around so that there isn't a high vacancy rate in one area. And so I'm wondering what that vacancy strategy is for the investigative units.
Thank you for that question, Councilmember. As Deputy Chief Washburn mentioned, the percentage of vacancies she has in her her bureau. Again, once officers are released from FTO, right now what we do is a balanced approach. We send some folks to investigations, training when it's allowed, and also any special operations. So as their officers are being released, and if our patrols are at full staffing, with, we're, again, like I mentioned, we're looking at the redistricting to see if we need to add officers to specific districts. So as we're working through that, when there are bodies available, they are being deployed strategically throughout the department to fill those vacancies. So they don't all go to special operations, they don't all go to investigations, or do they all go to training? We have a balanced approach to the needs and the priorities of the department, given the number of officers that are being released. And sometimes it's one or two, but that's what we have to work with right now.
Okay, and I'll take my conversations or my additional questions offline about what some of that may mean, because I want to get to some of the other questions that I had. We have also a Coyote Creek and Guadalupe River Trail Patrol that adds up to 600,000. How many how many officers are added to this, or is this an amount that will be reduced as our overtime hours are utilized? How will this? I'm guessing this is going all into overtime.
Yes, these are overtime funding for those specific details. And again, these are officers that volunteer to sign up to work these details. So this is overtime funding, so we can deploy officers in both of those trails.
And Councilmember, we are also hoping to get a match from the water district to help support these efforts. So some of that is occurring in the current year along Coyote Creek, and we're in conversations with the district to see if they extend that program into 22-23 and expand that to the Guadalupe River area.
Got it. And more, I know this is hard to quantify because police officers all have a different rate, but what are we looking at in terms of hours of patrol here?
I believe these are 6-hour shifts throughout the week. And it's primarily during the day shift hours.
So at the end of this, this would be for a whole year. At the end of this would render us how many hours?
I can get back to you with that. I don't know how many hours this, I know there's a deployment plan that we have in terms of the schedule,
Mhm.
and we can get back to you with that.
Okay, great. I would love that. So I'm going to go back to uh, the sexual assault item that I was talking about earlier. And I know some of you may have heard already from me through PISFIS on this, but it's important that I mention this to some of my colleagues who are not in PISFIS. And because we don't all, we're not all on the same Brown Act, we can't really talk about some of these items with each other. And so I'm going to take this opportunity to do this. And part of what the work of the gender-based work plan and the leadership with the leadership of Chief Mata and Jennifer is really to disrupt the sexual assault pipeline. And there's already research that shows how sexual assault leads to intimate partner violence, that leads to sex work, that leads to sex trafficking. And so when we want to create a large investment and interrupt future crimes, I know that this is one of the ways that we do this. So we all have also been very cognizant and supportive of interrupting the pipeline, the school to prison pipeline with the many programs that we have. But we don't do the same for the sexual assault pipeline. And the sexual assault pipeline mainly impacts young women of color. And it is not an intimate partner violence. The majority of those sexual assaults are children under the age of 12. So we can either follow the research that tells us how to interrupt this pipeline and how to disrupt it through some of our responses, or just really put a Band-Aid on this crime for future years. And so, Mayor, I don't know if you are familiar with the annual report that comes in through PISFIS, through the Public Safety Strategic Support Committee, but we received it, I think, after your March budget came out. And I would really encourage you to look at that annual report. It has some startling data. I would say the same for last year. Internet crimes against children rose 300% easily. And so this all to say that what we need to do is something similar to what, in terms of a response and to disrupt this pipeline, we need to do something similar in terms of what we are doing in other crime areas, such as pivoting and having patrol walking our beats throughout our city, such as having a river trail patrol, such as rearresting criminal defendants, or our automated license plate recognition camera system that we're all funding this year. These are all things that we're doing differently and that we're pivoting in order to address a crime area. But yet there isn't anything that we're doing specifically to pivot to do something differently for sexual assault and intimate partner violence and human trafficking, which is all part of this pipeline. So because, we can't really talk about a budget, Mayor, this is an opportunity for me to ask you what your thoughts are on how to respond to our sexual assault. I mean, I'm really grateful for the investment that you made a couple of years to get us going in this direction. And now we're at a point where we recognize what some of the pitfalls are for sexual assault and some of the solutions. And some of the solutions are to invest, obviously, in gender-based violence investigative units, to make sure that we have advocates, to make sure we have the Sexual Assault Bill of Rights in place, and those strategies that will make a difference, and also that we're abiding by the law to provide that. But what we haven't thought about is how does the Mayor's Gang Task Force and Best Services also support sexual assault survivors? Because there isn't a specific response. There is a response when there's a gunshot and somebody's wounded, and there's a whole response in our Mayor's Gang Task Force services to go to the hospital to talk to that victim of a gunshot wound, especially when they're gang related. But there isn't any response for sexual assault from our city in a very strategic manner, especially to disrupt services. Now, you heard DC Washburn say earlier that advocates on site make a huge difference, and we're always relying on advocates for grants, through grants. And we're not really growing that, even though the crime is growing. So I wanted to get your thoughts about investments, and maybe if you had an opportunity to see this report, that there would be something in your budget message to address this.
I'm happy to go look at the report. Thank you, Council Member. I guess I have a few thoughts. One is my experience at the DA's office is that there is an extensive network in place between rape crisis advocates and support teams at YWCA and elsewhere, as well as with victim witness, the DA's office in the county, to support survivors when they come forward with reports of abuse. In terms of what I'm doing personally, what I've been focused on in the last few weeks, one is I'd like to make sure if the police department is arresting somebody on a serious or violent crime, such as child molestation or sexual abuse, that they're actually held in jail until they're tried. And we've seen far too many cases, unfortunately, and I just wrote about this week. For example, a child molest suspect was arrested by SJPD, released without bail. He fled to Texas, was arrested there. We spent the resources to extradite him back to this county, and then he was released again. And we saw a similar incident with Henry Goulart, who was involved, obviously. It got media attention because of Cain Velasquez's attempted assault on Goulart, who was arrested also on a child molest arrest. So, it's important that if our officers are doing the hard work of arresting and investigating, that we actually bring these individuals to justice, because we know that that particular crime is one in which we have many repeat offenses from the same individual. And the best way to keep people safe is to keep them off the street. The second area where I think is very important is right now, ride-sharing companies like Uber and Lyft are operating with a policy in which they're not reporting to local law enforcement when there are allegations of sexual assault being made by passengers on their services. And for whatever reason, the California PUC seems to be perfectly okay with that. And I've had repeated meetings now with senior officials at Uber and Lyft, along with the DA's office, and in some cases with PD, to urge them at the very least to try a pilot where they actually report to local law enforcement, because I know from my experience as a DA what happens, which is someone believes that because they've told Lyft or Uber, that means law enforcement's going to do something about it. And the reality is we're not getting any of those reports. And we know it's happening at a very high frequency. Well, I shouldn't say high frequency. We know it's happening at a high number because we see the national numbers and they're astounding. And I'm very concerned about it. So I'd like to see the ride-sharing companies step up and actually report to law enforcement. I'd like to see state government step up, particularly PUC, and start mandating it. And I'm going to keep pushing on that. But there's a lot of areas to push on here because we know there's a lot of need.
Thank you, Mayor. I really appreciate that. And thank you for making sure that people are held in jail. I do think that our criminal justice system is broken, and crimes like the ones that you just mentioned are light crimes. That domestic violence, that intimate partner violence is not seen as, and that it doesn't receive this the punishment as other crimes do. And so I'm really grateful for your advocacy. Is also in the ride sharing. That's also really important, as we know that a lot of sex work is being done in homes and condos, because we've done such a good job of taking down massage parlors. Folks have other alternatives, and so that I think that's a great tool to make sure that the public is also participating and doing their level of responsibility in making sure that they report. Now, when it comes into the into our city system, we also have a responsibility to respond to the survivors. And I think that our police officers do a wonderful job when the crime is very apparent. It's a rape. It's, you know, this is what it is. We have somebody who came in to the home, broke in, and I've always heard really great feedback from our survivors and their families in terms of how our police department responds. Now, I don't know that that is not the issue, how our police department responds. The issue is the lack of resources, and then the follow-up in terms of making sure that we have these higher closure rates. The research already shows us the sooner that survivor gets connected with services and they have an advocate on hand, the higher rate, the higher chances are that, one, they'll get connected, and two, that they'll participate in and corroborate in whatever that they need to in order to put this person away. And so through our best programs, there isn't a service that responds, that does the other piece. You know, our police officers are doing their part in terms of what, you know, when there's vacancies as an issue, and all the other items that we already discussed. They're doing their part. But what else are we doing in order to support their survivors? And so that continues to be my question to you and the rest of my colleagues is, what is it that we are doing around gender-based violence through our best programs, through our Mayor's Gang Task Force, to respond and to support our survivors so that we can disrupt this pipeline? I know that I'm going to have a couple of submittals in terms of proposals. I hope that you can consider, and my colleagues can consider supporting those. I don't have all the answers, but I rely on those who do the work and those who are experts in their field. And this is what I get out of our joint meetings with the county. And there is already a system in place. Absolutely, Mayor, you're right. There's a great system that responds to our survivors. And I think they're doing they're doing fabulous, fabulous work. I also think that we need to make sure, because we as a city and the police department is the first on site, the first to respond, that we also have an obligation to bring in those resources ASAP, connect their survivors. And currently there is a backlog for therapeutic services and for advocates on our community service agency side. And so we need to increase that capacity or increase those grants. And I think that's part of the solution here, so that our police officers can our detectives can achieve a higher closure rate, is to also support that survivor so that they can achieve that. So anyways, I wanted to mention those items because we don't have an opportunity to talk openly. We're not in the same Brown Act and half of my colleagues are in the same Brown Act. And so I wanted to share those pieces with them and with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I know we're at the noon hour, and Councilmember Cohen, I know, still has questions. So why don't we, oh, you want to make it a quick one? Okay, we're going to make it a quick one.
I was just going to ask, it was brought, the crossing guards were brought up, and I know that because of people going back to school and a lot of extra traffic around schools, there's been some, certainly in my district and possibly in others, requests for additional guards beyond what was in past years allocated. There's also a new school that opened in our district that has requested crossing guards. So just quick question, was there an increase in funding to cover some additional requests, or is it flat from last year? And how do we, I guess I'll have a conversation offline with you about how, or with somebody in the department about how decisions are made about where allocations will be done next year.
Sure, Councilman, we can do that. Our school safety program manager does the assessments. So if it's a new school, they'll do the assessment along with DOT, and then they come up with the.
And at this point, there's no service increase anticipated in that budget. It's just a flat from previous before the school closures and things.
I think we would have to add, if we need to increase, we would need to add.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify, though, I think we're not recommending any changes from the previous level of authorized service. I don't think so. Just to be, yep. So the level that was authorized pre-pandemic to now hasn't changed from council authorization.
All right, we'll continue the conversation separately. Thank you.
Great. All right, thank you. Let's take a lunch break. We will resume with Community and Economic Development.
Yeah, so what I'd like to do is go back to Community and Economic Development, because I'm not sure council had the opportunity to ask the questions, and then we'll go to Transportation and Aviation. And
okay.
So if staff can bear with us, I'd appreciate coming back.
Is it 1:30, right?
It's at 1:30.
1:30. Okay, thank you all.
We do have a hand up from a member of the public if you want to do an AM session.
Sure, let's take that public comment now, and then we will conclude after this one individual. Thank you.
Blair Beekman.
Hi, Blair Beekman. Thank you for public comment. Hopefully I have 2 minutes at this time. I hope there can be a lot of public comment allowed for all the items today. For this item, I guess just reminders and the importance of the civil rights and civil protection practices of open public policies and accountability really can help organize your decision making for your items today. It can really help with the law enforcement questions. That I'm interested in how the future of foot patrol, introducing the future of foot patrol, can be a softer way to introduce policing in our future. Thank you for that idea. It was nicely mentioned that we're trying to address Coyote Creek issues where a lot of Vision Zero deaths were taking place. And that's more than just hype. You offered real solutions that it takes teamwork to really understand that situation. Good luck how we can address that issue in really more mellow terms than we have been more recently. From that, a real good luck that you tried to talk about the future of overtime issues. And I think San Jose, there's some good lessons to learn from the city of Oakland and their activist community that's trying to work on that issue as well. I think we're taking important lessons from that. And I think it's an important issue that we all can address. And good luck how we can do that in the coming years. And for all these items, all my talk for the past year about, do we have a possible earthquake coming up in the next year? I don't know, but this would be the time to try to, make those ideas kind of clear. What we can expect in the next year? And I know it takes effort, but to try to make that effort, it's important now. And I hope you can do that at this time, whatever it's going to be in the next year, to make things clear. Thank you.